Hello. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning for this week's Come Follow Me lesson with the Mormon News Report podcast. My name is Jenny Noonan Dye. I am joining you from Provo, Utah, along with my husband, John Dye. He's the one who's responsible for everything that you see on your screen for those of you who are partaking of the video, those of you who are joining us on Facebook for our live in-person with video lesson. For those of you who are doing just that, we'd love to hear from you. Go ahead and leave a comment. Let us know where you are, what stood out to you in your study this week. Maybe it was the first time, or maybe it was the 50th time that you've read these verses. And you know what? Maybe you've never even read them at all. That's totally fine. We get to as many comments as we can, just as we would as if we were gathered together all in person. I'd like to excuse my co-host for the Mormon News Report podcast, Brant Malone. He's in Detroit. He's being a dad. He's being a husband. He's being a disciple, doing his calling and doing what he needs to do today. And we are so glad to have with us, of course, Ben Bernards in California. He is our expert for the Hour of Power for our Come Follow Me study. Welcome, Ben. Good morning.
Good morning, everybody. So glad to be here again. Thanks for having me. Thank you so much to everybody else that's joining us, either live stream or the audio, for our little AP study of church history, as we call it, Doctrine and Covenants. We're going to give like an extra toolkit to help boost your understanding of Come Follow Me, and maybe add something that you haven't quite heard before. I think of this class as kind of like when my wife has to take allergy pills. She's learned that it's not just enough to take the generic green one or the blue one. She has to take like both just at the same time to get that extra level of immunity that we want. So maybe this is your little extra allergy pill for those that are dealing with hay fever in the springtime.
Yes, I sympathize with your wife. I have to take a Zyrtec just because it's April, not because of any of my symptoms. So hashtag not sponsored. Good morning to our friends who have been leaving a comment here. We've got... is it Ettore Trozzi?
Ettore.
Good greetings from a new member in Berlin, Germany. I'm Italian, but living here. And then Lay and Line, good morning from Puyallup. So awesome. Thanks for being here with us. Today is Sunday, April 25th, 2021. And the lesson this week is called My Law to Govern My Church. It covers Doctrine and Covenants, sections 41 through 44. And I need to mention that in the Sunday School manual, it starts out with this disclaimer. You won't be able to discuss as a class every principle taught in Doctrine and Covenants, sections 41 through 44. Seek inspiration to help you select principles that will be most relevant in your class. And so because of that, maybe you are joining us for, maybe this is the only Sunday school-ish class that you may participate in, or the only Come Follow Me discussion you may participate in this week. That's awesome. Maybe you are doing this and earlier or later, you're going to be participating in a Come Follow Me lesson with your local congregation. It is likely that in all of those cases, and as well as what you studied and what stood out to you and what we discussed today, could all be very different things, because there is just so much content to delve into in these sections.
There's a ton in there, and it's great. I'm so thankful that we have this opportunity, that we've taken this opportunity for ourselves. Brant and Jenny, you were the ones that started this whole thing, and John has been there just being our awesome executive producer in the background. And one of the things that I love about this section this week is we kind of get a glimpse of like a startup business. This is like the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints before it even had that name, where you've got a whole bunch of first generation converts. They've all gotten together. You've got a charismatic young leader, his wife, you've got a handful of people that he knew, a couple of cousins and brothers that were in there and their wives, and they're all kind of sitting around going like, okay, so what do we do? How are we going to do this? What's going on? And he's like, I've been told, let's get everybody to Kirtland and God's going to give us some law or something. And then boom, section 42 drops. So a whole lot of stuff in there. And like the section said, We're not going to be able to cover everything, but we do want to talk about just a couple of things. And one of the main topics that I'd love to discuss today is to explore, like you said, Brent is off being a disciple, and hopefully in some way that's what every single one of us are trying to do in our own form. And that's what this class is designed to do, is to help us be better versions of that, right? So question for Jenny, and I hope this is not too personal.
Okay.
But I'm curious, have you ever done something that you knew you were not supposed to do the thing, and yet, for reasons unexplained, you did the thing?
How dare you? Of course I have.
Can you think of an example that would be appropriate to share? And for anybody that's participating in the class, if you have a comment or a question or a version that you'd like to share, we'd love to hear it as well.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if we're going to dive into this, what we're supposed to do, right? So what does that even mean? According to whom and to what end is what I would say. But yeah, I mean, because there's what's right and there's what's right. And yes, I have. I'm trying to think. I mean, I guess the main thing that comes to mind is when I was supposed to get more sleep than I did. And I
knew that you were sleepy. You knew that's what your body's like. You need to sleep.
Right. And my mind was like, yeah, but we got to stay awake.
But someone's wrong on the internet. I need to go say something to them. How many times have I been there?
This never has happened.
I mean, every single one of us has probably had experiences like that where we've just been like, there's this thing that I know that I need to do. And you ever have almost like a disembodied moment where you kind of step back and look back at yourself? You're like, really? Are we not going to go do the thing that we should do? Yeah.
I just need to break in a minute and apologize, because we apparently have road work being done right outside our house. So if you hear some fun noises, like that drilling or whatever it is, that's what that is. So my apologies for that.
It's all good.
So sorry, what did you say?
So John, how about you? Anytime you've had a chance where there was something that you did something even though you just absolutely knew you weren't supposed to do it?
Yeah, just about every time, when you're younger and your mom specifically, but sometimes dad tell you not to do something, you jump into it. I remember a time I believe my mom had baked some fresh cookies to give to some neighbors and to others and said, don't touch these. And she came back and I think about half of them were left. So something like that.
Half of them. Absolutely. I mean, I wish that I could say that the last time that I stayed up playing video games and totally regretted it was like when I was a high school and teenager, not when I was a dad of teenagers and had big meetings at work the next day.
Yeah.
And reflecting on it, looking back now, I can think how I could have easily helped myself. I could have done all the external stuff. I could have set alarms on my phone. I could have written out a plan of, as soon as I get to this particular level, I'm going to shut it down. I could have asked my wife to say, hey, would you come get me off this stinking thing at midnight or whatever. I could have visualized myself doing all the right things or whatever. And next thing I know, it's 3:30 in the morning and I still haven't beat that level in Zelda. And I've totally missed the sleepy train. And I'm thinking, maybe I will just stay up until the sun comes up. It'd be a whole lot easier than trying to go to sleep right now. And it's kind of silly and kind of ridiculous how that happens so many times. And of course, the example I gave was absolutely trivial. But I'm sure that every one of us has probably had something that was maybe a little bit more serious and more personal that has happened before. And this is just kind of interesting that there is a connection between what we know to be the right thing versus what we actually do of the right thing. And sometimes that connection is kind of faulty, and it's strange how sometimes our brains can be manipulated into doing things that we don't necessarily want to do. And it's hard to get them to do the right thing, So with that in mind, there's this verse in D&C 41, and this is where we're going with all of this. And to help us understand why this is the way it is, understood just a tiny little bit about our human anatomy to help us kind of figure out this thing that we're living in. Every one of our brains is divided into multiple lobes and multiple regions. And I'm sure that we've got listeners and participants that know much more about the science than I do. But to oversimplify the fact, our brains can be thought of, we've got this big frontal lobe, the cerebrum, right? That frontal lobe is all about executive function. That's the doing part of our brain. And that part of our brain is not only in charge of like motor function and everything, but also like making a plan and visualizing it and getting around obstacles if the plan doesn't work out, right? So that's like the big boss that's like piloting the Millennium Falcon while you've got all the crazy stuff going on in the background. Now in the back, we've got this little piece called the cerebellum. That's the part of the brain that's in charge of knowing what you're supposed to do. That's the part that's in charge of learning and remembering and processing information. Now, the reason we bring this up is because those two halves of the brain have literal wires and connections, little neurons and pathways and everything that connect between the two. And if everything was absolutely perfect in our anatomy, then the connection and the flow of information between those two halves of the brain would be flawless. The information would just flow. The cerebellum would say, I know what I'm supposed to do, and it would hand it over to the cerebrum, and the cerebrum would go, okay, cool, we're going to go do it. But obviously that doesn't happen. Sometimes there is a very real, very measured gap in the way the information flows. Sometimes those two halves don't communicate. I was actually watching a YouTube video just a week or so ago that one of my brothers had sent me, talking about how scientists have seen that for people with ADHD or other types of mental struggles that make it hard for them to stay focused or stay concentrated on a thing, they've actually found that there is a significant gap in between how these halves of their brain communicate. It is literally, the wiring is not there. And so they can sit there and go, yeah, I know what I'm supposed to be doing right now, but I can't do it. Like I literally am unable to do so. And so they have to find other ways to mitigate, to work around that. You know what? Have you ever dealt with those kind of feelings, Jen? Have you ever struggled with that a little bit?
Every day? Yes, I have that. Yes. But
so
here's the thing, and I think this will tie in. As a kid, and even in my younger adult years, when I didn't know that that's what was going on, I felt like something was really wrong with me fundamentally. Like why I know that I should be doing this. I know I'm supposed to do this, and I am not, or I am, that sort of thing. And having a diagnosis, having that information that you gleaned from that YouTube video about that helps. Oh, there is a reason for this, and having that knowledge of there's a reason for this leads to a different perspective.
When you say it's a different perspective, and now that you've dealt with this, and not to get too personal in your own life, and I don't want to rat hole too much on just this one thing,
right?
But how has it helped you to have a perspective? How has it helped you in the gospel, if it has?
With you mean the difference between knowing and having it? Okay, so meaning if there's something that, and I can even take the let's see if I can tie this together. The not getting enough sleep thing. We learn in the scriptures about the benefit of getting rest. What that does for our bodies and for our minds. We also learn that from science. And so I think it gets to a point in all of our lives. I think it's interesting that John's example was from his childhood about remembering when his mom baked cookies. And now it's not so much that the desire to stay up for me or the desire to eat the cookies straight out of the oven for John. It's not that those desires have gone away. It's that we have a new perspective. It's that, yes, I do want to stay awake. I don't want to go to bed. However, more than I don't want to go to bed, I want to have a productive day tomorrow. For John, it's more than I want to eat these cookies. I want to not burn my mouth. I want these cookies to go to the people for whom they are intended. And so I think it can still be a struggle with what we want, and then what, that executive, the function that happens, like you've displayed here, the knowing and the doing. And I would even put in the like the desire, because the desire could still be there, but with that added knowledge, that added perspective, we can kind of choose which do we want more.
Yeah. Ooh, I love the way you say that. Which do we want more? That was an awesome example, and I'm so glad that we have your perspective from your personal experience, which I'm sure has been shared by so many other people, and it's a struggle that is so common to us. And I think there's a lot that we can learn about discipleship and about trying to figure out, how to be a Latter-day Saint, how to be a follower of Christ, how to be a good human being when we struggle to do the right things sometimes. I mean, that's every single one of us, right? So there's this verse in D&C 41. If we could turn there real quick. This is D&C 41, 41, 4, and 5. Would you mind reading that for me, Jen, please?
Yeah, I'm happy to. 4 and 5. And I will be your ruler when I come, and behold, I come quickly, and ye shall see that my law is kept. He that receiveth my law and doeth it, the same is my disciple. And he that saith he receiveth it and doeth it not, the same is not my disciple. And he shall be cast out from among you.
Whew, boy. Okay.
Yeah.
Lots of stuff to unpack here. So the context and the setting of this is, like we said earlier at the top of the hour, this is all the saints that have gathered together. They're all sitting here in Kirtland. The elders are together for the first time. They're trying to figure out what to do. And they've gathered together. This is like in January or February timeframe, in the wintertime, they're sitting in somebody's house. And Joseph receives this, and the heading says that he actually received it in the presence of other people. And frequently, that doesn't necessarily mean that he entered a transcendent state or glowing lights or anything. But all of a sudden, he would say, "There's something that I need to say," and they would usually have a person that would be taking notes or transcribing, or they went down and they wrote it down after the fact. So here he says, this is a promise that Jesus is going to come again. And that's what a lot of these early saints were looking forward to. They have this very proximate millennial viewpoint where they said, okay, that millennium, that second coming, all that stuff, it's going to be happening soon, right now. So we got to hurry and get everything ready because Christ is about to come. And in the middle of this, Joseph's receiving these revelations and these visions, and then they get this thing about receiving and doing the word. Okay, so let's talk about this for a second. First off, receiving versus doing. What are we to make of that? What's the difference between receiving the word and actually doing it? What do you think? No right answers or wrong answers. Just what do you think?
No, I'll give you a wrong answer. No, I'm just kidding. When I think of receiving versus doing, to me, it's a matter of, and just maybe a modern day example, and it could apply to anything. Let's say General Conference, we just had it, right? And we listened to, was Elder Renland who gave the talk about kindness? Okay, I should have prepared for this. Anyway, well, let's just pick any talk from conference. While you were listening, in the moment, wow, oh my goodness, you're
Why did you do that?
Right, or you're pierced in your heart, this is something that would benefit me, it's really touching, it would benefit my life, it would help me, help my family, and wow, I am inspired. And then Monday morning rolls around and same old. To me, that is the difference between receiving and doing. I do think when we consider those things, we do need to give ourselves and others, frankly, grace, because it takes time to establish new habits. It takes time to experiment upon the word, frankly. But yeah, when it comes to receiving and doing, that's kind of how I think about it. Is it great to choose to use the first weekend in April and October, to use your time to do that instead of going off to do something else. Absolutely. That is receiving, and that is not for nothing. The doing is where the discipleship comes in.
Absolutely. Tony made a comment a few minutes ago, and he says, when you say that our brains manipulated ourselves into doing something that we know we should be doing or shouldn't do you mean that you lie to ourselves? From my perspective, yeah, that's kind of what it is. Maybe not necessarily a lie straight out, but we tell stories to ourselves as to justify our behavior.
Yeah.
And if you've ever seen the Pixar movie Inside Out, which as an adult now has helped me understand more about my kids than just any lesson in biology or psychology or parenting I could ever have. In the movie Inside Out, humans are depicted as having multiple little people in our brains, and each little person represents a different core emotion. You've got one little person that represents all things joyful, one person that represents all things anger, and they want things to be fair. Another person that represents all things or your sense of disgust and like, oh my gosh, all those things gross me out, both emotionally and physically. You have one person that represents all things sad, and one person that represents all things fearful. And their goal is to try to keep you safe. So instead of viewing ourselves as a whole, complete person, it's more accurate to look at these multiple individual little core emotions inside our brain and realize that every one of them is trying to take control of the wheel. And they compete with each other. And adolescence is the state when all those things are fighting each other to try to gain control of the wheel. And adulthood can be described as when those things finally learn to work in harmony with each other, and they take their time and they agree, and the whole bus goes where it needs to go. So some people never reach that form of adulthood till very, very late in their life. And, some people figure that out when they're a teenager. Some people stay in that state of adulthood. So sometimes we're frequently receiving the good news, but not always doing it, right? I mean, I've been there before. I was helping a friend of mine train for a half marathon years ago, and he wanted to run long distance, 13 miles. That's a long way to run. And I was like, okay, I can give you a training plan. I can lay out exactly how many miles per week you're supposed to run. I can tell you some dietary principles of what you should eat that would help give you the right kind of fuel. And, we'll get you some new running shoes, we'll do all those things. And then, day one of training gets up and I'm like, okay, right. You're supposed to go hit 4 miles today. Go for it. And I texted him. I was like, hey, you do it yet? And he's like, nah, I'm not feeling it. And I was like, come on, man. It's like, we laid out all these different things. You received the word, but did not do it. It's kind of hard because for him, he had all these other external reasons. And when I read this verse in D&C 41, I couldn't help but think of a cross-reference in the Bible, John 7:17, because the language is very similar. John, you mind pulling up the next slide? And Jen, would you read this for us, please?
Yeah, no
John
problem.
7:17.
John 7:17 says, if any man will do his will, he shall know of the doctrine, whether it be of God or whether I speak of myself.
Okay, so we've got this idea that's very similarly connected, where if you do the will, you will then know the doctrine. Now, the context in that verse is Jesus, thousands of years ago, talking to a whole bunch of Palestinians and Jews and everybody that is sitting there around him, and he's trying to establish his credibility as a new teacher. Because he grew up, this is Yeshua of Nazareth. He grew up as a nobody in a nobody profession from a nobody town. And all of a sudden he's walking into this synagogue and he's teaching people. And they're like, wait a minute, who are you? And he's saying, look, you got to understand what I'm teaching you to do is something that you will only know for yourself if you actually put it into practice. And I think that's kind of the principle that we're seeing here, is that it's one thing for us to hear good advice, good instruction, and sometimes we struggle to actually put it into action. Now, as I read this verse in John 7:17, I couldn't help but notice that it says that if you want to really know whether or not it's true, you have to do it first. If you do the will, you shall know the doctrine, whether it's of God. And I remember reading that thinking, is it fair to be asked to do something before we know it's true? What do you think, Jen? Audio cut up. There we go. Gotcha.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Is it fair to do something before we know it's true? So I think we can do the actions, right? We can act before knowing it's true, but we can have the faith to, that it will result in, I mean, that's what faith is, right? That it will yield results, what we're doing. I think, though, there are a lot of instances where the only way we can know is to do. And what I mean by that is, and I don't just mean in good, like we've been talking about, experimenting on the word and acts of discipleship. But earlier, as we were talking again about just kind of decisions that we make as children or younger or older, that's fine. One example is the example of touching a hot stove, right? You see the coils, or even like the old lighters in cars, right? The thing about that is that
lighters in cars.
I know
you guys have lighters in your cars.
Ask your parents, everyone. But the I've heard people talk about, they remember. I actually never did this, but I remember wanting to touch the coils on the stove when they were on, if for no other reason than it was pretty. They were red, they were glowing, and I thought it was very beautiful. Of course, my parents said, do not touch it. It's hot. You will get burned. So they told me, and I believed them. And I have not, as as a human, experienced like, oh, but I don't know, I know. Other people, though, who have done it, they know because they did it. And that was the way.
We are missing the fingerprints to prove it.
Yeah, see? So, and that's just one example. Believe me, there are plenty of things that I have done that I shouldn't have done, and I learned the lesson too. But that is the example that comes to mind, because I think it's kind of universal that when we, that kind of, we remember being children and seeing that and being told, don't touch the hot stove. Of course, there are a lot of analogies we can tie to that, but that's that's something that comes to mind about knowing from doing.
I think that is that's a beautiful example. I heard a wise person once say that the burned hand teaches best, because after that, lessons on fire go straight to the heart. That there are some things that we will only know after we have been burned. Now, and that's spoken in the context of giving warnings to people, but I think the principle is the same thing, is that, if we really want to know whether or not things are true, we have to actually put it into practice. Okay, so what does that actually mean for us in discipleship? If I have a lesson on forgiving, and there's a person that I am really struggling with forgiving, the only way that I'm ever going to know is if I suck it up and try it. We've been struggling with this whole come follow me, this whole home-centered, church-supported thing that we've been doing for, over a year now. And sometimes it still feels like we're trying to go back to the old way. Well, the only way we're ever going to know is if we try it. There's this weird circular relationship between what we know and what we do. And sometimes once we do it, it helps us know a little bit better. Mm-hmm. And if we understand how our thoughts and our behaviors and our actions kind of tie into each other, this can help us modify our behavior in positive ways, where we can feel like we are less of a victim of our body and our chemistry and our biology. And we're actually making intentional choices about what we're doing with our lives. I think that's one of the purposes, or one of the beauties of that line that was said in DC 41, that if you receive the law and do it, then that's how we show our discipleship. And the key there is that word disciple, right? If you look closely, you see the same roots of the word discipline. A person who is, and discipline is different than motivation, right? Like, we can get really motivated. For my buddy, he was really motivated to run the half marathon. But on day one of training, that motivation ran out, like it was flamed out like lighter fluid, right? And now it was time for, the motivation is gone, and now it's time for discipline to kick in. But discipline has to come from on the inside. So we had to change the way that he was thinking about doing things. And if we need to change that behavior, or if any one of us is struggling to change our behavior, whether it's something gospel related or something, a sin that we're trying to overcome, or a bad habit, then if we really want to do that word and do that law, then we have to change the way that we think. John, if you wouldn't mind pulling up the slide, the next one, please. I want to talk briefly about this idea. So we talked about how doing the word helps us know. Let's go one more after that, please. There we go. Okay, so there's this idea. We talked about the circular relationship between thoughts and behavior. And it turns out that there's actually this emotional aspect to it. And this is not my model, but this is something that has been used multiple times by psychologists to help us understand what they call cognitive behavior therapy. Cognitive behavior therapy. The idea is, we start off by recognizing that our thoughts will create feelings. And those feelings can create behavior. And that behavior will then reinforce the thought. Now, it doesn't necessarily matter which one you start in or which one you start from, but there is this relationship between what we think about, how we feel about it, and then how we act on it, what we actually do. So before we go any further, Jen, what are your thoughts on this model and how it fits with us?
On CBT for scripture study?
Yeah.
I think you're absolutely right that thoughts and feelings and behavior absolutely apply to our spiritual selves, for sure, because it is more, like Nilda shares. She said it's just the same with what James said. Be hearers only, but not only hearers, but doers of the word, on receiving versus doing the word. And because our thoughts and our feelings motivate our behavior because of reward centers in the brain and such, it absolutely applies to how we live our lives spiritually and the things that we do in regards to our own personal discipleship.
Yeah. There's a story I'd like to share of a young person. Names are changed in this story. I'm going to call her Millie. Okay. Millie was told, she thought that she wasn't loved. She thought that she wasn't loved by her parents. She thought that she wasn't loved by God. And she was actually told this by her parents and by church leaders because she was a sinner. And this happened because when she was a teenager, around 16, 17 years old, she came to understand and identify as openly bisexual, as a Latter-day Saint, as an only child with no other bisexual kids around her. She was told, so she was told that she was broken, that she was flawed, and that God didn't love people like that. These are messages that she heard inside her little local community. These are messages that she heard outside from the broader community. So that's what she was thinking about. And we saw how there's a relationship between thoughts and emotions and behavior, right? So unsurprisingly, after having all of these thoughts and words that nobody loved her, that she was broken, that she was a sinner, she was worthless, the feelings that came, unsurprisingly, were low self-esteem, depression, feeling absolutely worthless, feeling that nobody would love her, feeling that she could not fit into the Mormon mold. that she was a misfit. She was an outcast, that something was wrong with her. Her parents sent her to a church school thinking that they could fix her by sending her there. But that wound up kind of only making it worse because it just reinforced how different she was from everybody else. So here she is with the roommates, a whole bunch of normal, air quote, roommates, and she's the only one that was different. She had a tattoo. She had nose piercings. She still liked to drink coffee. All these things that did not fit in the traditional Mormon mold. And so she thought that she was still broken. And she felt like nothing really mattered, like she wasn't good enough. She wasn't accepted. God didn't care about her and the church didn't want her. So those are all the thoughts and the feelings. And so what would you guess happened with the behavior? Well, if the places where she expected to go to find love and acceptance did not give love and acceptance, then she went to places that would. She would go to the places where she felt accepted for who she was, where she felt loved and valued for who she was. And it wasn't within her church community. It was with a lot of people that did things that the church community frowned upon. So she gets introduced to alcohol. She gets introduced to drugs. She gets introduced to drinking to try to numb the pain and forget the questions that were burning in her soul. And then the next day she would wake up and she would still have no answers. And she thought, well, I'm a bad person. That is who I am. I am not loved here or accepted here. So when trying to look at her story, and part of the great tragedy of this is that I wish that it was only a one-time story that only happened to one person. But unfortunately, it's kind of common. In trying to look at this, you know, as a leader in the church, we frequently say, okay, how can I fix this? How can I stop her behavior? What can I say that would make her stop drinking, stop doing drugs, hanging out with these other people? And for me, what I realized, one thing that would really help was start from the very bottom and start changing the thoughts. Like, don't even start with the whole behavior side, but start with what's happening up in here. Start changing the narrative of what she's telling herself. And I realized that I had, you know, years of programming to go against to try to replace. But if we started to shift her personal views on who she is and how she fits in, if we started flooding her with thoughts of her personal worth, regardless of what she has done, to help her realize that her personal worth is independent of her actions, that her worth is there by virtue of being a human, by virtue of being a daughter of heavenly parents who love her, no matter what she has done. Then if we can start flooding her with those kind of thoughts, then some of those thoughts just might take root. And then, like it says in Alma 32, if we can nourish those thoughts, that seed, carefully, every single day, then those feelings might come out of it. And if those good feelings come out of it, then perhaps that behavior will change. And I also realized that the behavior piece, that's totally on her. Like, I don't have to fix any of that behavior stuff, but I can help reinforce all the thoughts and everything. So once we realized, a simple quote that we sent her was to say that her value doesn't decrease just because somebody else didn't see her worth. Her value is absolutely inherent and it is there. And once she started seeing that, shifting her personal views on how she fits in, then those thoughts can take on new life and new light, and then her emotions do as well. And that's when the healing begins. That's when the behavior starts to shift. So if we reinforce the message and then help her get to that behavior part, then the cycle starts building upward instead of drilling downward.
Yeah. Yes. So I have a thought about that.
Please.
John, will you share that slide again too? Okay. So I absolutely agree with you. And something you said, like using that example, like you said, Ben, years of programming can be very difficult to overcome. And often the thoughts that that we're trying to overcome, that we're trying to reprogram, because in fact, as you talk about this person, Millie, going to a church school and doing more comparing of herself to those around her, feeling that she's broken. On the one hand, none of us are broken. And on the other hand, we're all broken, meaning that just because you see someone else, you don't know, their struggles as well, other than that we all have them. Some of them look different than others, for sure. But the idea is to get away from this idea that there's a mold that we need to fit into. When, again, what you're saying, I absolutely agree with, to have influence over the thoughts, to start there, that can lead to feelings and then behavior. We can start at any one of the 3 points, though. We can start at feeling. I know for myself, there have been times in my life when I feel just kind of, I don't know how else to say it than other than to say that I felt in a rut. And so how can I get out of that rut? For me, a lot of times it's exercising, specifically dancing. And so while I couldn't, in the moment, I wasn't able to alter my thought, I was able to alter my behavior. And that led to a change in how I felt and how I thought. So like you said, you can't force someone else's behavior. You can't. And the behavior is something that we, that is up to us individually. But I think as we turn to the scriptures and as we see, as we talk about the doing, it would be great if we all had the programming, that we are all beloved spirits of heavenly parents, that we all have intrinsic value and worth, and that we all are on a journey where our lives are that of imperfect beings who rely on each other and most importantly rely upon the Savior. Not everyone has that innate programming. Not everyone has that. And because of that, we do need to look at these things, these thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. And often by changing our behavior, by changing what we are ingesting with media, whether that's reading or listening to a podcast or music or talks.
Or social media.
Yes, any of it. Whether it's, where we spend our time, how we spend our time when we are able to, those are acts of doing. Those are things that can help us. And it certainly applies to heeding God's word.
It's you amen to everything you just said. I'm so glad to have your input and insight on this. Over the past couple of weeks, my kids have told me that they really wanted to try the new extra delicious crispy chicken sandwich from McDonald's. And I looked at my boys and I said, have we ever said that McDonald's is the kind of place that we want to go to? This is a California family. We eat Five Guys and In-N-Out. Everybody knows this. We do not go to McDonald's. It's Five Guys and In-N-Out. And even between those two, Five Guys and In-N-Out is, Hatfields and McCoys. And,
I don't know, but I do.
It's and everybody knows that Five Guys is the one true burger, and In-N-Out is totally derivative. It's absolutely horrible. Fries are just totally lame. Monster animal style, not even worth it. Five Guys all the way. I will defend them till I die. Anyway, but still, my boy said,
hashtag not sponsored.
Hashtag not sponsored. My boy's like, Dad, but I still really want to try that crispy chicken deluxe sandwich from McDonald's because it's got the pickles and it's got and I looked at him and I was like, you've been watching YouTube for the past couple hours, haven't you? And he's like, what are you talking about? No, I'm like, yeah, no. When you come down and you're asking for fast food at night, you've been programmed. And he's like, what? And I was like, seriously. And I could sit there and think about videos that he's watched that had nothing to do with the crispy chicken deluxe sandwich from McDonald's. It had to do with, Minecraft or cooking or baking or playing piano, all these other things that he watches, which are totally great. But he's being fed the ads. And it's a subconscious thing that he doesn't even realize because, the little advertisement will pop up after 30 seconds and then it closes. And then he comes down and he's walking around in the kitchen and he's looking around. And he's like, dude, I'm kind of hungry. Dad, could we can we go try a McDonald's crispy sandwich? And I was like, all right, okay. They have installed that app into your brain. Social media did exactly what it was programmed to do, and it worked. So just to help you touch the lighter, so to speak, I'll let you go try it. And sure, that night we went and we got a crispy chicken deluxe sandwich from McDonald's. # not sponsored yet again. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba. We're not loving it that much because he tried it and he was like, really? This is it? Like there's nothing. This is not a thing. And I was like, yeah, you're right. And now you know. So now next time you see that programming, it hits you, maybe you'll have a little bit of an immunity built up against it. And it's not going to be coming in and giving you infected with this desire to go have that crispy chicken sandwich deluxe from McDonald's. And I'm actually going to want to have one myself because I've said it so many times. But it's this idea that the way that our brains work, for better or for worse, can be influenced by the things that we consume and the things that we ruminate on and the things that we spend time thinking about. And that cyclical relationship between thoughts and feelings and behaviors, it applies to, yes, this real world example, but it's also a very real explanation of why our spiritual discipleship can be what it is. You know, I love with what Tony has said over here on the side, where it starts with loving people. Starts with loving people. That's the emotion, right? Kindness and love to them, making friends with people. And I mean, really making friends with them. And that at the most time can be difficult with people with busy lives. He says, I was blessed when I joined the church because my ward really embraced me as a friend, as I've said before. I like Al Fox's conversion story. You know, I think he says that's wonderful, that if we want to really shift this behavior, if we want to become better versions of ourselves, and really that's what the gospel is about, right? We're trying to become better versions of ourselves. And this is exactly what we saw through 41 and 42 and 43, was God telling these early saints saying, okay, look, you're going to get started. Let me give you a reminder of what the 10 commandments are. Let me give you guys instructions as to where you're supposed to go and how you're supposed to go teach the gospel. And you have to understand that it's going to be one thing for people to hear what you're saying, but it's going to be something totally different for people to actually do it. A lot of the churches that Joseph Smith grew up in, a lot of the congregations, and you know, this is still us today, had a very passive participation when it came to Christianity.
Which is
right?
the better version of ourselves.
The better version of ourselves. See what happened? You see the advertisement too many times, and now all of a sudden John is going to go get brunch, and we have the expectations versus reality.
Yeah.
And something else comes up. So, wow. What was I saying? Totally threw me offline. Okay,
Sorry about that. Yeah, we had to.
Yeah. This is the perfect object lesson. Passive Christianity. That's what it was. Okay. I was like, boop, boop, boop. Hang on a second. I had to walk my way through that a second again. So our behavior, sometimes when we are dealing with discipleship, it's so common and so easy to hear it and then not do it, right? The old story that I would hear at a youth fireside years ago was a whole bunch of chickens that got together at a meeting because the lead chicken called them together that night at a farm. And the lead chicken said, you guys, I've got fabulous news. This is so cool. We have just figured out that we can fly. Like, we've never done this before. We've never actually tried it, but we've got wings. We've got the feathers. This is so awesome. We can fly. And to show everybody that he could do it, he climbed up on top of the little fence post there at the farm, and he jumped and he flew. And all the other chickens were like, wow, that is so awesome. I can't try to do it. And then they all walked home. So this idea that sometimes what we choose to do, what we know versus what we do, is still at a disconnect. And it's something that we're probably going to struggle with our entire lives. I mean, it's a hard thing for us to manage. And maybe, just maybe, when we will have figured it out, we'll be ready to graduate to whatever comes next, right? Or at the very least, we could start to try to teach it to that next generation that's coming up after us.
And because the chickens walked, well, they got caught and made into, nope, we're not. Okay. Absolutely. And that's kind of what I meant when I said before, just that, to give ourselves and each other grace about it. Because sometimes it takes time, right? That's why that's actually, I think, one of the reasons behind teaching children and youth to set goals, because things take time. So yeah, I like that a lot. Did we get to everything that you wanted to get to?
On that particular topic, yeah.
Okay.
Could we go to another verse?
Yes.
All right, John, if you wouldn't mind, let's go to the last slide that we have here from D&C 43, 8 through 10. Go ahead and go through one more.
There it is.
All right. It's D&C 43, 8 and 9. So this was same context, same group of people reading the exact same thing. And another little bit of instruction. And this one is also tied into this idea of discipleship. Jen, would you mind reading that for us, please? D&C 43, 8 and 9.
Happy to. And now, behold, I give unto you a commandment, that when ye are assembled together, ye shall instruct and edify each other, that ye may know how to act and direct my church, how to act upon the points of my law and commandments, which I have given. And thus ye shall become instructed in the law of my church, and be sanctified by that which ye have received, and ye shall bind yourselves to act in all holiness before me.
Oh boy, lots of good stuff in there.
Yeah.
So to start off, what stands out to you, Jen, off the top of your head? Anything interesting?
Well, yeah, and we've talked about this so often over the past year, the idea of being assembled together, because as the world shut down and we were instructed to actually act upon home-centered, church-supported worship. The question has come up, as in different areas, not just in the United States, but throughout the world, which, it looks like a lot of our audience, at least who have left comments in our thread today, are from all over the planet, and we're grateful for that. As circumstances have changed and we go back to the idea of gathering together in person, it has come up. Why? For what? A lot of people have had new and unique, positive, faith-building, family-fortifying experiences worshiping from home. For others, it has highlighted their loneliness and their desire to be with others. And for a lot of people, it has done both. So the question has come up: why would we assemble together? If worship is individual between our God and ourselves, why do we assemble? And so I really like this idea of, as it says in verse 8, I give unto you a commandment, that when ye are assembled together, ye shall instruct and edify each other. And of course, in this circumstance, it's that you may know how to act and direct my church, how to act upon the points of my law and commandments, which I have given. And I'll tell you, Ben, one reason I look forward to our Come Follow Me discussions, and frankly, that are happening in the church and in the gospel. And to me, that is strengthening. That is edifying, because I could read and study and get, frankly, personal revelation, which is very valuable to me. I am also edified and strengthened by hearing others' perspectives. And that happens when we assemble, not necessarily in person, as we've learned, as we're doing right now, but that is one purpose. And that's what stands out.
Absolutely. I'm so glad. And, we hope that other people that have been learning or listening or chiming in, we hope that you guys have felt the same way. We hope that this has been something that has been instructive, and edifying. And before I go any further, Jen and John, are you guys still there? I'm not sure if I lost the stream. We still there? Okay, cool. I had hiccup on my side. I wasn't sure if I lost connectivity.
We lost you for a couple. Okay.
Gotcha. Okay. No, it's fine. So, this whole idea of edifying each other, when I see this verse to me, I like the imperative form that is used when he says, ye shall instruct. Like, this is what you have to do. You need to get to each other and you're going to teach each other, because everybody has something that they can teach. Everybody has something that the other people don't know. So, of course, that is part of our idea of, learning from each other, not having professional teachers, but also being willing to learn from our brothers and sisters, because everybody has something that they can share with each other. But the next verb that they use, edify, and that's where I want to focus on here as kind of a closing thought. That's the root of the word edifice, a building. It comes from the old Latin, which literally means to build a building, but not just to build any building, but it was to build a dwelling. Edifice, that was a place where people lived. So in other words, raising an edifice is where people, not just where people spend time once a week in programs, but raising an edifice is where people dwell. That's supposed to be home. So I think that's what the gospel of Jesus Christ should feel like. It should feel like home. When we do it right, when it's done right and all the ingredients are there, that home is a safe space. It's a shelter. That's where people are welcomed and nourished, and we find rest and the common bonds. And it's the kind of place that you look forward to going back to, right? I want to go home. I can't wait to go home. I want to bring other people into my home. And sometimes, just sometimes, our church groups can feel like that. When we build an edifice, building an edifice happens a brick at a time, one layer at a time. We'll have foundations that are laid out and squared up at the corners, and they're strong and true. And we have frameworks that are built on that. And those frameworks give support and direction. And then we kind of fill everything in around the building, and we build up that framework. And sometimes maybe the edifice needs remodeling. Sometimes what worked for the previous inhabitants doesn't work for us. So we replace stuff, we remove, we rethink, we rebuild. But a home remodeled and reshaped is still home. Even after we thank the old one for its service and Marie Kondo that sucker out of here and we remove it. And perhaps in some silly way that kind of helps us understand how this modern version of Mormonism can work going into the next century and whatever is beyond. That maybe the home of being a Latter-day Saint can have a slightly different shape now. I mean, we have new content. We've got podcasts and live streams. We've got new curriculum. We've got new ways of teaching, some of it officially from the church, some of it homebrewed from the rest of us like this. It has men and women doing different jobs than they had before. It has hopefully a safer space for those who were previously marginalized. And hopefully it can be a shining beacon for those who would be allies and those who need allies. This is a place where every one of God's children truly matter. I mean, it sounds harsh to say, but this ain't my grandpa's church anymore. And I hope that that's for the better, even though we're all still built on the same rock. And somehow in this remodeling, somehow in this constructing this edifice, this has become something that's starting to feel like something new. And let's hope maybe something a little bit better.
I love it. The concept, excuse me, of home, to me is holy, and it is more than a building. It is more than a house, and there are lots of definitions throughout our lives that help bring us closer to each other and closer to the divine. So thank you very much for that, Ben. That was beautiful. I want to go ahead and we'll go ahead and wrap this up. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. Whether you were able to leave a comment or not, whether you're watching it right now or watching it later or listening to it later, we appreciate you being here. Thank you to John for preparing everything and running the show. Thank you, Ben, for all your preparation, your slides, your insights, and the way that you lead the lesson. It's wonderful. I really love it. Next week, we will meet again around 9 a.m. Mountain Daylight Time-ish. We usually start between 9 and 9:20. Sunday, May 2nd. The lesson is called The Promises Shall Be Fulfilled, and it is Doctrine and Covenants, section 45. It's a long section, 70-some verses, but it's only the one section. We'd love to have you join us again next week. And we're going to end a little bit differently than we typically do. Usually we would play our outro music and go out that way. But what we're going to do is we're going to close. John is going to play a video, the parable of the chickens, because that is exactly what Ben, one of the things that Ben brought to the table today. So thank you all again for joining us. And we will see you again next time.
There was a ward of chickens. This was a good ward, and the bishop of that ward got tired of watching his ward members walk to church every Sunday and participate in the different meetings and then walk home. And he thought, we're chickens, we're birds, we should be able to fly. So at the beginning of a year, he assembled his ward, and for sacrament meeting that day, he taught them to spread their wings, to flap those wings, and to fly. And lo and behold, all these chickens in his ward found this new ability to be able to actually get off the ground and fly. And it was the most successful sacrament meeting in the history of this ward of chickens. Everybody was so excited with this newfound ability. And then they closed the meeting with prayer, and all of the chickens walked home. You can see the moral of the story, hopefully, that as we spread our wings and try new things, unlearn new doctrines, and are able to soar in certain ways, that we apply what we learn to our daily life, that it actually has a change in who we are becoming. It isn't just a New Year's resolution that lasts for a day or a week or maybe a month, but it actually translates into a new way of approaching our life and moving forward.